Gary Stearman here, welcoming you to another episode of Prophecy in the News. And by the way, today we still have a couple of very, very expert guests. They are both authors. Tom Horn on my right, L.A. Marzulli on my left. They've authored many books, which we're offering to you right here on Prophecy in the News. Gary Stearman with another exciting edition of Prophecy in the News. We have with us again two highly acclaimed authors, and one on my right, Tom Horn, on my left, L.A. Marzulli. They've written about the subject at hand for at least the last couple of broadcasts. We've been discussing the idea that the ancient gods, if you will, that were so devotedly believed in by the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Romans. All of the ancient cultures believed that there were gods circulating around in the atmosphere and bestowing their goodness unto man. Well, we have an equally persuasive myth today, and that is that there are aliens from outer space coming down to give man perhaps a blessing, if you will. We don't necessarily believe that to be true. In fact, far from it. But gentlemen, that's where we've sort of headed toward, and we are now there, that maybe we're seeing exactly what used to happen in the old world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, the Royal Academy that we referred to earlier, as a follow-up to that, of course, Stephen Hawking,
yes.
Famous physicist, has been one of a few of the voices following up on that, saying, if they're really out there, it might not be so smart to be ringing the bell saying, here we are, come and have us for dinner.
Stephen Hawking has nothing to do but sit and think, and a brilliant, brilliant mathematician. And, of course, he deals with cosmology 24/7. And he's come up with some amazing mathematical theories. But when he begins to speak authoritatively about aliens, visitors from outer space, suggesting that maybe they wouldn't be friendly, you've got to sit up and take notice, right?
I would say a resounding yes to that. And simply because this is one of the greatest minds that have ever been on the planet.
Yeah.
And he's explored and plumbed the depths of the idea of extraterrestrial life. And unlike the exopolitic crowd, which is running to embrace so-called ET as our progenitors, as those who are responsible for creating all life on this planet and creating civilizations, and the ancient astronaut theory, he's sending up a flare, he's sending up a warning. And I think it would behoove the church at large to listen to that warning. And he's really only touching the tip of the iceberg, which I'm sure we're going to get more into the depths of that iceberg and what's really underneath the surface.
I'm sure that Stephen Hawking is speaking in terms of evolution. That is, he subscribes to the evolutionary model, I'm sure, rather than the creation model. And he would have to think that these aliens from other worlds evolved even as we humans have evolved, and they've probably had longer to evolve, and therefore they're more brilliant. But with that would come the idea of being more capable of wiping out an enemy. They would have more advanced weapons. They would perhaps view us as we view a farm animal. He's saying, watch it, maybe making friends with somebody who wants to eat you up. And I can understand the logic of that, but it's all based on the idea of evolution. Now, we don't subscribe to evolution, we just subscribe to creation and the fall, which has allowed alien entities to enter into this world's societies, literally since Adam and Eve walked in the garden. And this is strictly a Christian subject. That is to say, we've got to be the experts. We've got to enunciate a policy, if you will, a way of looking at this whole thing that makes sense to other people. We don't shy away from what could be a difficult subject, namely aliens coming in from other planets. Nobody wants to talk about that. They'll think you're crazy. But yet you've written about it. In fact, you've written a novel in 3 parts. You've written authoritatively on what happens when these aliens insinuate themselves into our world, and you've written, I think, persuasively on how people react to them. And that's interesting to me. How do people react? I'm talking about the government. I'm talking about academicians, people who are considered the movers and shakers in society. How are they dealing with this?
Well, I think unless a person has a biblical overview and has an idea and has studied what the Bible tells us about fallen angels and about demons and about prophecy concerning those things, and we touched on that, as in the days of Noah, so will be in the Son of Man returns. Unless you come from that paradigm, from that worldview, I think a person is lost. And they are certainly certainly open to the deception from these so-called entities. It's been my understanding, and from my study and my research, that these so-called aliens, which I believe are fallen angels, lie and lie habitually. Jacques Vallée calls them messengers of deception, and titled his book that way. So here's a secular man, Jacques Vallée, with all due respect to Mr. Vallée, entitling his book Messengers of Deception. He's not coming from a Christian worldview,
Right.
but he realizes that they lie. And let's just go over something here. If a person lies, they are deliberately obfuscating the truth. They are trying to lead a person away from what is truth. So they have to know what the truth is in order to lie. So that means, taking from that bit of information, I can extrapolate that these entities are malevolent, i.e. evil.
Now, going back a few years to, and we've discussed this on our last program, Roswell, we had the quote-unquote alien landing, which is still classified above top secret, and the reaction of our government was to create a group of intelligentsia to deal with what they consider to be a problem. It was a message problem too, because after all, how do you make yourselves appear credible if you've got a spaceship landing and crashing with little green guys on it? How do you make yourself credible? How do you keep your credibility before society? Well, they elected to keep this thing top secret. And B, what really transpired between our government and those aliens? And at that point, a secret panel was convened, usually called MJ-12, right. And under the Eisenhower administration, it was called Project Jehovah, and brilliant people, Einstein, J. Robert Oppenheimer, Edward Teller, others, were taken into this convocation of minds to try to deal with this problem. And among the questions we now know on their agenda was the problem with cattle that showed up mutilated in a way that couldn't have been done by human beings. As far back as 1953, this group of very superior minds threw themselves at this problem of cattle mutilation. And I believe from that day to this, it's still an open question. And here we can talk about something that I suppose Christians don't usually talk about, but we find that literally hundreds, if not thousands, of cattle have been mutilated in an almost sacrificial way, and nobody has ever yet been arrested, if I'm correct on that.
According to my research, the FBI, law enforcement, in the decades that this phenomenon has been going on, continuing, there has not been charges brought against one person. And remember, this is abduction of a person's personal property, trespassing. There's a whole list of offenses that who's ever perpetrating these crimes is committing. And law enforcement now, and I've spoken to people off the record, and they're told by their superiors, don't even go out, don't even just take a report. They just bury the stuff. They know that who's ever doing this, who's ever mutilating the cattle, does so with impunity. They come and go as they please, and no one touches them. And so we're looking at some sort of a intelligence, some sort of phenomena that is beyond anything we know. And of course, I believe it's interdimensional. I believe it reeks of the fallen angels. It is demonic to the nines. It is evil, malevolent. It is satanic.
And the cattle are always found drained of all their blood. They are deprived of certain vital organs, and including the tongue, oftentimes the eyeball, and the surgery is, well, supernatural almost. I mean, for example, a heart removed out of a chest wall without there being any exit wound, a brain removed from a skull, all kinds of amazing things. And what's going on? It appears to be almost a sacrificial or ritual type of operation.
I would concur. If we move away from that phenomena briefly and look at what supposedly happens in satanic ritual abuse, the work of Russ Dizdar echoes this, and he's certainly written about it. The idea of blood sacrifice. When we go back into antiquity, we see that blood sacrifice is used by all the ancient cultures. Just think of the Aztecs and cutting out the heart of it, and of a live human being, and then showing it to them, and the Mayans. And I mean, we go back through antiquity and we see this blood sacrifice, the idea of blood sacrifice. Fast forward to the cattle mutilations, it's the same type of phenomena that's going on. I believe except it's no longer human beings sacrificing to fallen angels or demons. It's the fallen angels themselves creating this mayhem. Do they get? We know from Scripture that the life is in the blood. Mm-hmm. We know that. Abel's blood cries out for the offense because of his murder. That being said, is it possible that these entities, in order to manifest, this is just a scenario, I'm not saying this is exactly what happens, do they draw sustenance from this? Does that blood give them some sort of a life force which enables them then to manifest in our dimension, in our space-time? We don't know. Is it used in part of the breeding program? Abductees talk about being taken into rooms where these hybrids are in jars. I've written about this. And they see these hybrids in all different forms of gestation. Is the blood, because bovine blood is very similar to human blood, is this part and parcel of the abduction phenomena? Does it all link together? The short answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. It does all link together. But it's so beyond the pale that certainly most Christians don't want to get into this. But we hear from 2 Thessalonians that the fallen one, Satan, Lucifer, comes with all signs and lying wonders. In other words, when he finally manifests on this planet, all the stops are pulled out. Mm-hmm. He's not messing around. He knows his time is short. And it will be, and this is why I think all this is leading up, it's accelerating, it's moving towards this flashpoint.
Now, these cattle mutilations you're talking about have happened pretty much as top secret events for the last 40, 50 years. That is to say, nobody has ever witnessed a mutilation happening until recently.
Right.